The Cleveland Browns thought their biggest offseason storyline would be the quarterback battle. After all, when a rookie like Shedeur Sanders arrives with this much attention, every throw, every practice rep, and every decision becomes headline material. Fans expected endless debates about whether Sanders could climb the depth chart, impress coaches, and prove he belongs in the NFL. But that's not the story that's suddenly grabbing everyone's attention. Instead, a completely different conversation has exploded across Browns circles. It isn't about arm strength, it isn't about playbooks, and it isn't even about who should start at quarterback. It's about something far more subtle, yet potentially just as important. A growing number of fans have become fixated on what they're seeing, or think they're seeing, between Shedeur Sanders and one of the Browns' most recognizable receivers, Jerry Jeudy. At first, it seemed like nothing more than routine OTA footage, a few clips from practice, a few passes, a few incompletions. But then fans started slowing the videos down. They started dissecting routes, body language, timing, and effort. Suddenly, social media was flooded with theories, debates, and strong opinions about whether something looked off whenever Sanders and Judy connected on the field. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, there is no confirmed conflict between the two players. In fact, Judy has publicly spoken positively about Sanders' development, but that hasn't stopped the speculation, because in today's NFL, perception can spread faster than facts, and once a narrative starts gaining momentum, it becomes almost impossible to ignore. What makes this story even more fascinating is that while some fans are questioning the connection between Sanders and Judy, others are pointing toward a completely different group of players. Several younger receivers have begun generating buzz during practices, and according to many observers, their energy and chemistry with Sanders have become impossible to overlook. So is this simply an off-season overreaction fueled by a few practice clips, or are Browns fans noticing the early signs of a much bigger story developing inside one of the NFL's most closely watched quarterback situations? Because the deeper you look into what's happening at Browns OTAs, the more complicated this story becomes, and what happens next could have a major impact on how this entire offense develops heading into the season. What turned this from a routine off-season storyline into a full-blown debate were a handful of practice clips that started making the rounds online. Normally, OTA footage comes and goes without much attention. Fans might watch a few highlights, react to a nice throw, and move on. But this time was different. The moment clips involving Shedeur Sanders began appearing online, every detail suddenly mattered. That's because Sanders isn't just another rookie quarterback trying to earn a roster spot. He arrived in Cleveland carrying enormous expectations and one of the biggest spotlights in football. Every completion gets celebrated, every incompletion gets analyzed, and every interaction with teammates becomes part of a much larger conversation. So when a few practice reps failed to look perfectly synchronized, fans immediately started paying attention. The discussion wasn't initially about wins, losses, or even talent, it was about chemistry. Some viewers began focusing on timing between Sanders and certain receivers. They watched routes repeatedly. They analyzed body language. They debated whether some players looked more engaged than others. Before long, social media was filled with side-by-side comparisons, screenshots, and slow-motion breakdowns of practice footage that most teams would barely think twice about. What made the conversation grow so quickly was the fact that nobody seemed to agree on what they were seeing. One group of fans argued that everything being discussed was completely normal for a young quarterback learning a new offense. After all, OTAs are designed for experimentation, mistakes, and adjustments. Timing issues happen every year, miscommunications happen every year. Chemistry isn't built overnight. But another group wasn't convinced. They pointed to specific reps and argued that something felt different. They claimed certain receivers appeared more aggressive when the ball was in the air. They believed some players were doing a better job helping Sanders settle into the offense. Fair or not, those observations began generating thousands of reactions online. And once fans start debating effort, urgency, and commitment, emotions tend to rise quickly. The most interesting part wasn't that mistakes were happening. Mistakes happen in every practice across the NFL. What caught people's attention was the contrast they believed they were seeing between different players on the field. Every time Sanders connected with one target, fans would praise the energy. Every time another rep looked slightly off, questions immediately followed. The discussion stopped being about individual plays and became about patterns. Soon, every new clip seemed to fuel the debate even more. One video would spark hundreds of comments, another would generate countless theories. Fans began searching for evidence that supported whatever conclusion they had already reached. Some believed the concerns were legitimate, others thought the entire thing was being blown wildly out of proportion, yet the conversation kept getting louder. And that's when Jerry Jeudy's name started appearing in more of these discussions. Because while the online debate was supposedly about chemistry, many fans quickly realized this wasn't the first time Jerry Jeudy had found himself under a microscope. In fact, long before Shedeur Sanders ever arrived in Cleveland, questions about Judy were already following him throughout his NFL career. And that history may explain why this story caught fire so quickly. The reason this debate exploded so quickly has a lot to do with Jerry Jeudy's reputation long before Shedeur Sanders ever put on a Browns uniform. If these exact clips had involved a different receiver, chances are the reaction wouldn't have been nearly as intense. But when fans saw Jerry Jeudy's name attached to the discussion, old conversations immediately rushing back. That's what makes this situation so fascinating.
Because nobody questions Jerry Jeudy's talent. Very few receivers enter the NFL with the kind of hype he carried coming out of college. His route running was considered elite, his ability to create separation was viewed as special. Scouts praised his footwork, his quickness, and his ability to make defenders look completely lost. When he entered the league as a first-round pick, many people expected him to become one of football's premier wide receivers, and at times he's shown flashes of exactly that. There have been games where Judy looked unstoppable, games where he reminded everyone why he was drafted so highly in the first place. The talent has never disappeared, the athleticism has never disappeared, the ability to make spectacular plays has never disappeared. That's actually why the criticism has followed him for so long. Fans aren't frustrated because they think he lacks ability. They're frustrated because they believe he's capable of even more. Throughout different stages of his NFL career, some critics have questioned whether Judy consistently plays with the same edge and intensity as the league's most feared receivers. Again, that's an opinion that has circulated among certain fans and analysts for years, not a proven fact. But once a narrative takes hold around a player, every future performance tends to be viewed through that same lens. And that's exactly what's happening now. When fans watch a player like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, or A.J. Brown, they often see receivers attacking every ball like it's the final play of the game. Whether that's fair or unfair as a comparison, those are the standards many fans use when evaluating top receivers. So whenever Judy appears less explosive on a particular rep, some viewers immediately connect it to criticisms they've heard before. The problem is that football isn't always that simple. Practice clips only show a tiny fraction of what's actually happening. Fans don't know the assignment. They don't know the coaching instructions. They don't know whether a player is being told to work on timing, spacing, or route adjustments. Yet social media often fills in those blanks with assumptions, and when a player already has an established reputation, those assumptions spread even faster. That's why these OTA discussions have become so emotionally charged. Many Browns fans entered the offseason expecting Judy to be one of the veteran leaders helping stabilize the offense. They expected him to become a reliable target regardless of who eventually won the quarterback competition. So when some viewers believed they were seeing a disconnect during certain practice reps, the reaction wasn't just about those individual plays. It was about expectations colliding with perception. And perception is incredibly powerful in the NFL. Once fans start believing a player is showing a recurring pattern, every future clip becomes evidence. A routine incompletion suddenly becomes a talking point. A slightly mistimed route becomes a debate. An ordinary practice rep becomes a viral discussion. Fair or unfair, that's the reality of playing under a microscope. But here's where the story becomes even more complicated. Because while fans were debating Jerry Jeudy's effort, another factor was quietly making the situation much bigger than it otherwise would have been. The quarterback involved wasn't just any rookie, it was Shedeur Sanders, one of the most talked about young players in football, and the level of attention surrounding him was about to take this entire conversation to another level. The truth is, this story probably never becomes a major talking point if the quarterback involved is anyone other than Shedeur Sanders. That's the factor that changes everything. From the moment Sanders entered the NFL, he became one of the most closely watched rookies in football. Long before he threw his first professional pass, people already had strong opinions about him. Some believed he was destined to succeed, others questioned whether he could live up to the enormous hype surrounding him. Either way, everyone was paying attention, and that's exactly why every single practice rep suddenly carries so much weight. Most rookie quarterbacks can go through off-season workouts without the entire football world dissecting every throw. They can make mistakes in relative peace. They can build chemistry quietly behind the scenes. Sanders doesn't have that luxury. Every completion gets posted online. Every incompletion sparks debate. Every positive report creates excitement, and every negative observation creates concern. The spotlight never really turns off. Part of that comes from his famous football background. Part of it comes from the confidence he's shown throughout his career. And part of it comes from the fact that Sanders has become one of the most recognizable young names in sports. Whether people support him or doubt him, they want to know how he's performing. As a result, Browns fans have become incredibly invested in his development. They aren't just watching to see whether Sanders can throw the football. They're watching to see who he's connecting with. They're watching who seems comfortable around him. They're watching which players are helping him succeed and which players appear out of sync. Every interaction becomes part of a larger evaluation process. That's why the discussions involving Jerry Jeudy have become so emotional.
Many fans view Sanders as a young quarterback entering one of the most important stretches of his football career. He's learning a professional offense. He's adapting to NFL speed. He's trying to earn trust from coaches and teammates. He's competing in an environment where every opportunity matters. Because of that, supporters naturally want to see the players around him helping make that transition easier. When fans believe a receiver is fighting for every catch, diving for difficult throws, or creating easy completions, they immediately notice. Those players often receive praise because supporters feel they're helping the young quarterback build confidence. On the other hand, whenever a rep looks disconnected or poorly timed, frustration quickly follows. Fair or unfair, that's how quarterback development is viewed. The quarterback usually receives the majority of the praise when things go well, and the majority of the blame when things go poorly. Fans know this. That's why many Sanders supporters pay close attention to everything happening around him. They don't just analyze his throws, they analyze the circumstances surrounding those throws. And recently, that's exactly what has been happening online. Some fans have started rewatching practice footage looking for signs of progress. Others are searching for evidence that supports concerns they already have. Every route gets examined, every catch gets discussed, every missed opportunity becomes a conversation. What would normally be forgotten within minutes is now being debated for days. But here's where things become even more interesting. While much of the attention has focused on Sanders and Judy, another storyline has quietly been gaining momentum behind the scenes. A group of younger receivers has started generating significant buzz among Browns fans. They don't have the same reputation, they don't have the same contracts, and they certainly don't have the same expectations. What they do have, according to many observers, is something that's becoming impossible to ignore: energy. And that energy is creating comparisons that Jerry Jeudy may not have expected heading into this offseason. While much of the attention has centered on Jerry Jeudy, another storyline has quietly started gaining momentum throughout Browns practices. And according to many fans, it may be one of the most important developments of the entire offseason. The younger receivers are making noise. not because they're guaranteed roster spots, not because they're already stars, and not because coaches have declared them future starters. They're generating attention because of the way they're approaching every single opportunity. When fans watch practice footage, one thing immediately stands out. Some of the younger players appear to be treating every rep like it could determine their future in the NFL. Every route is run with urgency, every catch is attacked aggressively, every opportunity looks like it matters, and fans love that. In a city like Cleveland, effort has always resonated with the fan base. Supporters can forgive mistakes, they can forgive growing pains. What they struggle to overlook is a perceived lack of urgency. That's why so many viewers have become fascinated by some of the younger receivers fighting for recognition. These players understand something very important. For established veterans, OTAs are part of the yearly routine. For younger players trying to earn meaningful roles, OTAs can become career-changing opportunities. One strong practice can attract attention. One impressive connection with a quarterback can create momentum. One memorable sequence can put a player on the coaching staff's radar in a completely different way. That desperation often shows up on the field. Fans have noticed receivers diving for difficult catches, extending through contested situations, and attacking the football with visible intensity. Whether they're first-team reps or backup reps doesn't seem to matter. The energy remains the same, the urgency remains the same, and because of that, supporters are naturally gravitating toward those players. What's making the situation even more interesting is how often Shedeur Sanders seems to find himself connected to these discussions. Every time a younger receiver makes a difficult catch from Sanders, social media lights up. Every time a route looks crisp and synchronized, fans immediately start talking about chemistry. Suddenly, people aren't just evaluating individual players anymore, they're evaluating relationships. And in football, relationships matter. Quarterbacks naturally develop trust with certain receivers over time. It doesn't happen because of draft position. It doesn't happen because of salary. It happens through repetition, through timing, through confidence, through countless small moments that gradually build into something bigger. That's why so many fans have become so excited about the younger targets getting opportunities alongside Sanders. They see players who appear eager to prove themselves. They see receivers trying to establish trust as quickly as possible. And perhaps most importantly, they see a chance for unexpected chemistry to emerge. Every year in the NFL, overlooked players rise up the depth chart because they develop a connection with a quarterback at exactly the right moment. Many supporters are wondering if something similar could be happening in Cleveland.
Now, it's important to keep perspective. OTAs are not training camp. Training camp is not the regular season, and practice highlights rarely tell the entire story. Coaches evaluate countless factors that fans never get to see. A spectacular catch might look amazing online, while a perfectly executed route without a target goes completely unnoticed. But that hasn't stopped the conversation from growing. In fact, some fans have started asking a much bigger question. What if the issue isn't effort at all? What if people are misreading what they're seeing on the field? What if the discussion surrounding Jerry Jeudy and Shedeur Sanders has less to do with motivation and more to do with something every NFL offense experiences during the offseason? Chemistry. Because the deeper you examine these practice clips, the harder it becomes to separate perception from reality. And that raises an uncomfortable possibility that many fans may not have considered yet. But what if everyone is looking at this situation the wrong way? What if the real story isn't about effort, attitude, or commitment at all? What if it's simply about chemistry, or more accurately, the lack of chemistry that naturally exists during the earliest stages of a quarterback's development? That's the question more people are beginning to ask as this debate continues to grow. The reality is that football chemistry is one of the hardest things to evaluate from short practice clips. Fans see a few seconds of a route. Coaches see hundreds of repetitions. Fans see the result. Coaches understand the process. And sometimes those two perspectives can look completely different.
A receiver slowing down slightly could be following instructions. A quarterback throwing behind a target could be experimenting with timing. A route that appears disconnected on video might actually be part of a much larger adjustment happening within the offense. That's why many people around the league are always careful about drawing major conclusions from OTA footage, because chemistry isn't something that appears overnight. It develops through repetition, through mistakes, through communication, through countless hours that never make it onto social media. The best quarterback-receiver duos in NFL history didn't become great because they immediately understood each other. They became great because they worked through misunderstandings until they eventually started seeing the game the same way. And that's an important point when discussing Shedeur Sanders. He's still learning a professional offense. He's still building relationships with an entirely new group of teammates. He's still adjusting to NFL timing, NFL spacing, and NFL defensive speed. Every quarterback goes through that process. Some connections form quickly, others take months. That's why there's another side to this story that often gets overlooked. While some fans have been questioning the chemistry between Sanders and Jeudy, there have also been positive comments coming from inside the organization. Judy himself has publicly spoken favorably about Sanders' progress, describing the rookie quarterback as becoming increasingly confident and comfortable within the offense. That doesn't sound like someone engaged in a personal conflict. In fact, that's what makes this entire debate so difficult to evaluate. There are essentially two different stories unfolding at the same time. One story is happening online, where fans are analyzing clips, discussing body language, and forming opinions based on what they believe they're seeing. The other story is happening inside the Browns facility, where coaches and players are focused on development, learning, and preparation. And those stories don't always match. The internet often demands immediate answers. Football rarely provides them. Supporters want to know right now whether Sanders and Judy are developing a strong connection. They want clear evidence. They want instant results. But quarterback-receiver chemistry doesn't operate on social media timelines. Sometimes the most productive relationships start slowly before exploding later in the season. There are countless examples of that throughout NFL history. That's why some observers believe the current reaction may be a little premature. Not necessarily wrong, not necessarily right, just early. After all, we're talking about off-season practices where no games have been played, no depth charts have been finalized, and no meaningful football has occurred yet. A lot can change between now and Week 1. Still, even if the concerns are being exaggerated, there's one thing that cannot be denied. The perception of a problem has already taken on a life of its own. And in today's NFL, perception can become incredibly powerful. Once fans start believing a particular narrative, every new clip, every new report, and every new practice becomes another piece of evidence supporting that belief. That's exactly what's happening now, and it's creating a level of pressure that neither Shedeur Sanders nor Jerry Jeudy can completely escape. Because whether the chemistry concerns are real or not, the narrative itself is becoming very real. And the longer it survives, the bigger the spotlight becomes. At this point, the conversation has moved far beyond a few practice clips. What started as a handful of observations during off-season workouts has evolved into one of the most discussed storylines surrounding the Browns. And the reason isn't necessarily because anyone has uncovered definitive proof of a problem. The reason is much simpler. People have started paying attention. Once a narrative gains momentum in the NFL, it can spread faster than almost anything else. A single clip gets posted, fans react, analysts discuss it, more clips appear, more opinions follow. Before long, what began as a small conversation transforms into a storyline that everyone suddenly feels compelled to weigh in on. That's exactly what's happening here. Every new practice seems to generate another round of discussion. Every Sanders throw to Judy gets scrutinized. Every incompletion gets replayed. Every successful connection gets examined for clues. Fans are no longer simply watching football practice, they're searching for answers. And when people start searching for answers, they often begin noticing things they previously would have ignored. A slightly mistimed route suddenly becomes significant. A receiver slowing down at the end of a play becomes a talking point. A missed connection becomes evidence. The result is a cycle that continuously feeds itself. The more people discuss the story, the more attention it receives. The more attention it receives, the closer every future interaction gets analyzed. And the closer those interactions get analyzed, the easier it becomes for the narrative to continue growing. What's fascinating is that this phenomenon isn't unique to Cleveland. Every year, NFL fans become attached to certain off-season narratives. Sometimes those narratives prove completely accurate. Other times they disappear the moment meaningful games begin. But regardless of the outcome, the conversation itself can become incredibly powerful. Because perception influences expectations. Right now, many fans are approaching every Sanders-Jeudy rep with expectations already in mind. Some expect to see evidence of chemistry concerns. Others expect to see proof that the entire controversy has been overblown. Either way, people are watching through a specific lens. And once that happens, objectivity becomes difficult. A positive play might be dismissed as an exception. A negative play might be viewed as confirmation. That's why narratives are so hard to stop once they reach a certain point. Even if Sanders and Judy put together several strong practices in a row, there will still be people discussing the earlier concerns. Even if the chemistry improves dramatically during training camp, questions may continue lingering because the storyline has already established itself within the fanbase. The internet rarely moves backward. It constantly searches for the next development, the next clue, the next piece of information that either strengthens or weakens the existing narrative. That's why every new OTA report, every practice video, and every training camp update is likely to receive even more attention moving forward. But there's another reason this story continues gaining traction: pressure. Pressure changes everything in professional sports. The moment fans begin discussing chemistry concerns, expectations rise. Players know they're being watched. Coaches know people are paying attention. Every interaction becomes more noticeable. Every mistake becomes more visible. For Shedeur Sanders, that pressure already exists because of the spotlight surrounding his arrival in Cleveland. For Jerry Jeudy, the pressure comes from a different place. He's no longer being evaluated solely on talent. He's being evaluated on perception. Fans aren't just asking whether he can make plays. They're asking whether he's helping a young quarterback develop. They're asking whether he's building leadership. They're asking whether he's building trust. Those are much harder questions to answer. And that's why this discussion keeps growing. Because at its core, this story isn't really about one throw, one route, or one practice. It's about expectations. It's about trust. It's about how quickly opinions form when a highly anticipated rookie quarterback enters the picture.
But here's where things get even more interesting. Narratives can create pressure, but pressure also creates opportunities. And if this story continues into training camp, both Sanders and Jeudy will have a chance to completely change the conversation. In fact, the next phase of this offseason may determine whether this entire debate fades away or becomes one of the biggest Browns storylines heading into the regular season. Now comes the part that could determine whether this entire story disappears or explodes into one of the biggest talking points of the Browns offseason. What happens next? Right now, everyone is working with limited information. OTAs provide glimpses, not answers. Fans see a few clips, reporters share observations, social media debates every detail. But eventually, the Browns will move into a much more revealing phase of preparation: training camp. And that's where the real evaluations begin. Unlike OTAs, training camp brings a different level of intensity. The practices become more competitive, the pressure increases, the repetitions matter more. Players start separating themselves from the pack. Most importantly, relationships between quarterbacks and receivers become far easier to identify.
That's why so many people are waiting to see what happens when Sanders and Jeudy get more opportunities together. If the chemistry improves, this entire conversation could disappear almost overnight. A few strong practices, a handful of impressive connections, maybe a standout preseason performance. Suddenly the clips that sparked all this debate become old news. Fans move on. Analysts find new storylines. The concerns fade into the background. NFL fans have seen that happen countless times before. An off-season narrative can dominate headlines for weeks, only to completely vanish once the players start performing on the field. That's always a possibility here. But there's another possibility. What if the same discussions continue? What if training camp footage produces more questions than answers? What if fans continue noticing a disconnect? What if younger receivers keep generating positive buzz, while Sanders appears to develop stronger timing with other targets? If that happens, the conversation could become much louder, because by that point, people wouldn't be discussing a handful of OTA clutches anymore. They'll be discussing a trend. Fair or unfair, that's how many fans would view it. The narrative would gain additional credibility simply because it survived beyond the early stages of the offseason. And that's where things could get uncomfortable, not necessarily for the players themselves, but for the expectations surrounding them. Quarterbacks naturally develop trust over time. They begin identifying which receivers consistently end up where they're supposed to be. They learn who responds well under pressure. They discover who makes difficult plays when a rep starts breaking down. Trust is one of the most valuable currencies in football. The interesting thing about trust is that it often develops quietly. It isn't announced during press conferences. It isn't measured in statistics. It reveals itself through habits. A quarterback starts looking for certain receivers more often. Timing becomes more natural. The offense starts moving with greater rhythm. And sometimes those connections form in unexpected places. That's why so many Browns fans are paying such close attention to the younger receivers creating buzz during practice. They're wondering whether one of those players could emerge as a favorite target for Sanders moving forward. Every NFL season features unexpected contributors who build strong chemistry with a quarterback before anyone sees it coming. Could that happen here? It's certainly possible. At the same time, it's equally possible that Judy reminds everyone why he was once viewed as one of the most talented young receivers in football. Talent is never the issue. If he starts making plays consistently during camp, many of the current concerns could disappear in a matter of days. That's what makes this story so intriguing. There isn't a clear ending yet. Nobody knows whether the current discussion will prove meaningful or completely irrelevant once the regular season arrives. Nobody knows which receivers Sanders will ultimately trust most. Nobody knows how the depth chart will evolve over the coming months. What we do know is that the spotlight is only getting brighter.
Every practice from this point forward will receive more attention. Every report will be analyzed more closely. Every Sanders to Jeudy connection will generate reactions. Every missed opportunity will spark another round of debate. And that's why the next few weeks could be absolutely critical, because this isn't really about one receiver or one quarterback anymore. It's about whether a growing narrative becomes reality. If Sanders and Jeudy begin clicking, the story ends. If the questions continue, the discussion may become impossible to ignore. And with training camp approaching fast, Browns fans are about to find out which direction this story is heading. So, after all the clips, all the debates, and all the speculation, where does this story actually leave the Cleveland Browns? The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain. What began as a few off-season practice clips has evolved into a much larger conversation about chemistry, trust, expectations, and the future of one of the NFL's most talked-about young quarterbacks. Some fans believe they're seeing warning signs. Others believe the entire controversy has been blown far out of proportion. And until meaningful football begins, both sides will continue making their case. What's undeniable, however, is that Shedeur Sanders has become one of the most closely watched players in the league before even taking a regular season snap. Every throw is analyzed, every practice rep becomes content, every interaction gets magnified. That's the reality of being a quarterback with this much attention surrounding you.
And that's exactly why the discussion surrounding Jerry Jeudy refuses to go away. Whether the concerns are justified or not, the perception has already taken root. Fans are paying attention to every route, every catch attempt, and every sign of chemistry between the two players. Fair or unfair, that's the environment both Sanders and Jeudy now find themselves operating in. But here's the part many people forget. Football has a funny way of changing narratives overnight. One great practice can shift momentum, one preseason game can silence critics, one explosive performance can completely rewrite the story everyone thought they understood. That's why it would be a mistake to treat any current narrative as a final verdict. The NFL is filled with examples of players proving doubters wrong. It's also filled with examples of concerns that initially seemed small, eventually becoming significant. Right now, nobody knows which category this situation belongs in. What we do know is that the pressure is growing, training camp is approaching, competition is intensifying, expectations are rising. Every player is trying to earn trust, establish a role, and prepare for a season that could define careers. For Shedeur Sanders, the challenge is proving he belongs. For Jerry Jeudy, the challenge is proving that the conversations surrounding him are missing the bigger picture. And for Browns fans, the challenge is figuring out what to believe while the story continues unfolding in real time. Maybe the chemistry concerns disappear completely. Maybe the younger receivers continue creating buzz. Maybe Sanders and Jeudy eventually develop one of the strongest connections on the roster. Or maybe the questions fans are asking today become even louder once training camp begins. That's what makes this storyline so fascinating. The final chapter hasn't been written yet. In fact, it may only be beginning. And as the Browns move closer to the regular season, one thing is certain: every throw, every catch, and every practice rep will continue to be watched more closely than ever before. So what do you think? Are Browns fans seeing the early signs of a real chemistry issue between Shedeur Sanders and Jerry Jeudy? Or is this simply another off-season narrative that will disappear the moment real football begins? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest Browns news, rumors, and analysis. Because this story is far from over, and we'll be following every development along the way.